All right, let's dive right in today. We're tackling something that I think everyone's at least a little bit curious about, maybe even a little nervous about cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And to be more specific, we're going to zero in on those network vulnerabilities that businesses and, yeah, even government agencies have to worry about. The kind of stuff that can really turn things upside down.
Yeah.
So think of this as like our guide, our blueprint for building a digital fortress.
A fortress. I love it.
Right. Because the thing is, and this might surprise you, but even those really big organizations, the ones with all the resources in the world, even they get hit with these attacks all the time. So we're digging into this excerpt today. It's called Business Network Vulnerabilities, Protecting Your Company's Digital Assets. And oh man, let me tell you, this stuff is eye-opening.
Oh, yeah. It really lays everything out so clearly. I mean, it breaks down those threats in a way that anyone can understand. And then it walks you through, like, step by step, how to protect yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first, got to start with the basics. What exactly is a network vulnerability? I mean, it's like everyone's talking about them, but it can be a little hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. But really, when you break it down, it's any weakness in your security setup.
Yeah.
And hackers, they can use those weaknesses to get in. So think of it like a crack in the foundation of a building. Even a small crack, it can compromise the whole structure.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about, like, having a super strong password. It's about making sure that there are no weak spots anywhere in your system.
Huh.
Wow. But, okay, how do hackers actually get in? Like, what are some of their tactics?
Well, there are a ton of different ways they can try to get in, but let's start with one that I bet you've heard of, even if you haven't fallen for it yourself: phishing attacks.
Oh, yeah, phishing. That's where you get those tricky emails trying to fool you. I've seen some that are so convincing, like they look exactly like they're from companies I actually do business with.
Yeah, they're getting really good at it, more sophisticated all the time, and they're designed to play on our trust, you know? In fact, you know what the stats say. Over 30% of people will click on a phishing link.
30%?
Yeah, just the average.
Whoa, that's way higher than I would guessed. Okay, so phishing is all about tricking people. But what about ransomware? That one always sounds terrifying, like someone just locks up all your files and demands a ransom.
It's basically, yeah, like digital kidnapping, but for your data. And sadly, it's happening more and more. I mean, do you know what the average cost of recovering from a ransomware attack is?
No, tell me.
Over $1.8 million.
What?
Yeah.
That's insane. I mean, it's one thing to hear about it in the news, but to think that's the average cost? Oh, man. So what happens if you just don't pay?
Well, that's the tough part. You could lose all of your data. And even if you do pay, there's no guarantee that you'll get your data back.
Wow. Okay, so phishing, ransomware, two scary scenarios. What else should people be worried about? What about DDoS attacks? I know it stands for distributed denial of service, but what does that actually look like in real life?
Okay, imagine this. There's a huge crowd of people, and they're all trying to get into a store at the exact same time. So many people that they completely block the entrance.
Oh.
That's basically what a DDoS attack does to a network. It floods the system with so much traffic that real users can't get in.
Ah, I see. So it's not about stealing data, it's about shutting down access.
You got it. Imagine your website going down during, like, your biggest sale of the year. That's the kind of disruption a DDoS attack can cause.
Okay, definitely adding that to the list of things to avoid. What about man-in-the-middle attacks? That sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
It does, doesn't it? Basically, what happens is an attacker secretly positions themselves between you and whatever website or server you're communicating with. They're like a silent eavesdropper. They can capture everything: your usernames, passwords, even your financial info.
So they're not breaking into my system. They're intercepting what I'm sending to someone else.
Exactly. And public Wi-Fi. That's a prime spot for these kinds of attacks. You never know who's listening in.
You're making me paranoid about using public Wi-Fi ever again.
Oh.
Okay, next up, zero-day exploits. What makes these so dangerous?
Well, what makes them so tough is that they target brand new software flaws, like holes that even the developers don't know about yet. Imagine you have a leaky roof, but you have no idea. By the time you realize that it's raining inside, the damage is already done.
So speed is the main issue here. They strike before there's even a fix available.
Right, and that's what makes them so hard to protect against. Because there's no solution ready, it's like trying to fix a car while it's still speeding down the highway.
Okay, I'm seeing why it's so important to stay on top of those software updates. But what about SQL injection? I hear people talk about that, but I've never really understood what it is.
It's a little more on the technical side. So most websites use databases to store information, right? Like your username, your password, things like that. And in a SQL injection attack, what happens is the hacker uses code, malicious code, to basically trick the database into just giving up that information.
Oh, wow. So it's not about brute force. It's about manipulating the system.
Exactly. And it really shows how important it is to have strong security measures in place, especially for websites that handle really sensitive info.
Yeah, because that could be a disaster. Okay, we've covered a lot of scary stuff here. Phishing, ransomware, DDoS, man-in-the-middle, zero-day exploits, SQL injection. It's a lot to take in. But now I'm curious about something. What about the threats that come from inside a company?
You're talking about insider threats. And yeah, those can be some of the toughest to deal with.
Is it because it's people you already trust? Like employees, contractors, even partners?
Exactly. And it's not always intentional either. Someone might click on a phishing link without even realizing it, or they leave their laptop unlocked at a coffee shop, things like that. Even a simple mistake can have huge consequences.
Wow, so it's not always about someone trying to do something bad. Sometimes it's just carelessness.
Right. That's why training and awareness are so important. It's not just about the tech, it's about making sure everyone understands the risks and the best practices. Even something as basic as teaching people to double-check an email address before clicking a link, that can make a huge difference.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen the dark side, the whole rogues gallery of cyber attacks. Kind of overwhelming, to be honest. But let's shift gears and talk solutions. How do we protect ourselves? How do we build that digital fortress we were talking about?
It can feel overwhelming, that's for sure. But the good news is that there are some proven strategies, and they can really reduce your risk. Let's start with one that's simple, but so effective. Keep all your software up to date.
Oh, those update notifications. The ones we all love to ignore.
Yep. Think of it this way. Those updates, a lot of times they include patches that fix security holes. It's like locking your doors and windows. Super basic, but it makes a huge difference.
Okay, so those updates, not just annoying, they're essential. What else can we do? What about strong authentication?
That's another crucial piece. Strong authentication is all about verifying that someone really is who they say they are before you give them access to your systems. And one of the best ways to do that is with multi-factor authentication, or MFA.
Okay, I've heard of MFA, but I'm not really sure how it works.
Imagine a door with two locks. You need both keys to open it, right? That's essentially what MFA does. It requires you to prove your identity in multiple ways. Maybe it's your password and a code sent to your phone.
So it's like double locking the door.
Exactly. It makes it so much harder for attackers to get in, even if they manage to steal one of your credentials.
Okay, so updated software, strong authentication. What about those network firewalls I keep hearing about? Or those like digital shields?
Haha, that's a good way to put it. Firewalls are basically the gatekeepers that control incoming and outgoing network traffic. They look at every piece of data and block anything that doesn't meet your security rules. Think of them like security checkpoints, you know? They only let authorized personnel through.
So they were filtering out the bad guys.
Exactly. And there are different types. Some are basic, some are more advanced. The key is to pick the right one for your needs and your level of risk.
Right, it's not one size fits all. Okay, firewalls, check. What about data encryption? How does that fit into all of this?
Data encryption is all about scrambling your data, making it unreadable to anyone who doesn't have the key. It's like writing a secret message in code. Only the intended recipient can decipher it.
So even if someone manages to get a hold of my data, it's useless without the key.
Exactly. It adds a really crucial layer of protection, especially for sensitive information like customer data or financial records.
Okay, got it. Encryption, check. What else could we do?
Well, even with all the tech stuff in place, the human element is still super important. That's why employee cybersecurity training is so essential.
Right. We talked about insider threats earlier, so it's about training our teams to be more security aware.
Absolutely. A workforce that's well-trained in security, that's your best line of defense. Even just something like hovering your mouse over a link to see where it really goes before clicking, that can prevent a phishing attack.
I'll definitely be doing that from now on. Okay, training is key. What about endpoint security solutions? What are those exactly?
Okay, think about this. You have bodyguards for your physical safety, right?
Right.
Well, endpoint security is like having a bodyguard for each of your devices. It makes sure they're equipped to fight off attacks on their own.
Oh, okay. A bodyguard for each device. I like that. What are some examples?
Antivirus software is a classic example. It scans for and removes malicious programs. But then we also have more advanced stuff like endpoint detection and response, or EDR.
EDR, that one sounds interesting. What does it do?
EDR is like having a super vigilant security guard, constantly watching for any suspicious activity on your device. It not only detects threats, but can actually isolate infected systems. So it stops them from spreading the damage.
So it's proactive, not just reactive.
Exactly. Again, it's about layering your defenses.
Okay, endpoint security, check. We've covered software updates, strong authentication, firewalls, encryption, training, endpoint security. It's quite a checklist. Is there anything else we should be doing to make sure our cyber fortress is as strong as it can be?
One last piece of the puzzle, but it's super important, regular security audits
Yeah.
and something called penetration testing. They're like health checkups for your entire network. They make sure that everything is running smoothly and there are no hidden vulnerabilities.
So it's not just about setting things up and then forgetting about them. You need ongoing maintenance and evaluation.
Absolutely. It's a continuous process. You got to make sure your security is up to date and you can adapt to the ever-changing threat landscape.
Okay, so what happens during a security audit?
Think of it as a really thorough inspection. Experts come in, they look at your network, your systems, your applications. They're looking for any weak points, any gaps. They might even review your policies and procedures.
Wow, they really do a deep dive. But what about penetration testing?
Penetration testing takes it a step further. It's basically a controlled attack. Ethical hackers, the good guys, in this case they try to break into your systems, they simulate a real-world cyber attack.
Wait, you hire hackers to try to break into your system? That sounds kind of risky.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually one of the best ways to find and fix vulnerabilities before the bad guys find them. Think of it as a fire drill for your cyber defenses.
Yeah, better to find the weaknesses in a safe environment.
Exactly. And the results of these tests, the audits and the penetration tests, can be super valuable. They show you where you need to focus your efforts to make things stronger.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the big picture here. Building a strong cybersecurity posture is all about layers, vigilance, and ongoing assessment. It's not just a one-time thing, it's a continuous process. But what if a business just doesn't have the expertise in-house to handle all of this?
That's where managed service providers, or MSPs, come in, for businesses that don't have the resources to manage all this themselves. Partnering with an MSP, or even better, a managed security services provider, MSSP, that can be a game changer.
Okay, what's the difference between an MSP and an MSSP?
So an MSP usually offers a wider range of IT services, like network management, help desk support, cloud computing, stuff like that. An MSSP, on the other hand, focuses specifically on security.
Oh, okay. So it's like having a whole security team on call, even if you don't have the budget to hire a full team yourself.
You got it. MSSPs, they offer all sorts of services like 24/7 monitoring, threat detection, incident response. They can even help with compliance. They're basically your cybersecurity partners. They're working around the clock to keep your network safe.
That sounds incredibly valuable, especially for smaller businesses or ones that are just getting started.
It can be a huge weight off your shoulders to know that you have that expertise and support, to know that your security is in good hands.
All right, this has been super informative. We've gone from defining network vulnerabilities to looking at all sorts of cyber attacks, and now we have a whole arsenal of protection strategies. But before we go any further, I'm curious, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway is that cybersecurity, it's not a set it and forget it thing. It's an ongoing process, and it requires vigilance, proactive measures, and a willingness to adapt because the threats are always evolving.
Proactive security is key. Okay, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into this world of network vulnerabilities and how to protect yourself. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into business network vulnerabilities.
It's been a wild ride so far. I feel like I'm learning so much.
It's a lot to take in, for sure.
Yeah, we've already talked about everything from like those phishing attacks to ransomware and how important things like firewalls and encryption are.
It's a complex landscape, that's for sure. But even just understanding the basics is a huge step towards protecting yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to dig a little deeper into some of those protection strategies. We talked about keeping software up to date, but honestly, that can feel overwhelming sometimes.
I get it.
How do you actually manage that effectively, especially when you have so many devices and applications to keep track of?
Right. It's not just your computer, it's your phone, your tablet, everything. Well,
Right.
that's where a good patch management system comes in. It's not just about randomly installing updates whenever you see them. It's about being strategic, having a
That's
system.
preventative maintenance, right?
Yeah.
You don't wait for your car to break down before you change the oil.
Exactly. You got to stay ahead of the problems.
Right.
So, first things first, you need to know exactly what you have, a complete inventory of all your software and all your hardware.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you need a process for identifying those updates, evaluating them, and then installing them. This might mean using some automated tools, setting your systems to update automatically, or even testing those updates before you roll them out to your whole network.
So it's not just a click and install and hope for the best kind of situation.
No, not at all. It's about being thoughtful and making sure that everything is running smoothly and securely.
Okay, catch management, got it. What about strong authentication? We talked about MFA, but are there other strategies businesses should be thinking about?
Definitely. MFA is a great first line of defense, but we can make it even stronger. One way is with something called role-based access control, or RBAC.
RBAC?
Yeah.
Basically, it's about giving people access to information and systems based on their role in the company.
Oh, okay.
So instead of everyone having access to everything,
Yeah.
you're limiting it to only what they need to do their job.
So it's like a need-to-know basis. Exactly. It's all about damage control, you know? If an account does get compromised, you want to limit the potential damage. So even if someone gets into one account, they don't automatically have the keys to the kingdom.
You're containing the blast radius. I like that. Okay, so we've got patching, strong authentication, and RBAC. What about firewalls? We touched on them earlier, but I think we could dive a little deeper. How do they actually work, and what are the different kinds?
So firewalls, they act like barriers between your network and the outside world. They examine every single thing coming in and going out, blocking anything that doesn't meet your security rules, like a bouncer at a nightclub. Checking IDs, only letting in the people who are supposed to be there.
Okay, so they're the first line of defense.
Exactly. And just like bouncers, firewalls come in different types. Some are more basic, like packet filtering firewalls, which look at each individual packet of data. And then you have more advanced ones, like stateful inspection firewalls, which actually keep track of the whole conversation between your network and the outside world.
So choosing the right firewall depends on what the business actually needs.
Absolutely. It's really important to work with a security expert to figure out which type is best for your organization, based on your size, your complexity, how much risk you're comfortable with.
Right, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Mm.
Firewalls, check. Now let's talk about data encryption. We mentioned it before, but I want to get into the nitty-gritty. What are the different types, and how can businesses use them effectively?
So there are two main types of encryption: symmetric and asymmetric. Think of symmetric encryption like having a single key that locks and unlocks a box. It's fast and efficient, but you have to figure out a secure way to share that key with anyone who needs to open the box.
And if that key gets lost or stolen, you're in trouble.
Big trouble. Now, asymmetric encryption, on the other hand, uses two keys, a public key and a private key. The public key is like an open mailbox anyone can drop a message in, but only the person with the private key can open it and read the message.
Okay.
It's more secure, but it does take more computing power.
I see. So it's like a special lock that anyone can use to secure a message, but only the person it's meant for can actually open it.
Exactly. Asymmetric encryption is often used for things like secure email and online transactions, while symmetric encryption is more common for data that's just stored on your hard drive.
That makes sense.
Right.
So how do you actually implement these encryption methods?
Well, a lot of operating systems and applications actually have built-in encryption features. For example, you can encrypt your entire hard drive using a feature called BitLocker on Windows or File Vault on a Mac. You can also use encryption software to protect specific files and folders.
So there are options for both the whole system and for individual files.
Yep. And for data that's moving around on the internet, like when you're browsing a website or sending an email, you can use secure protocols like SSL/TLS. These create what's called an encrypted tunnel, so no one can snoop on your data while it's being transmitted.
Okay, so encryption is all about making sure that data is protected both when it's stored and when it's being sent back and forth.
Exactly. It's a critical layer of security, especially for sensitive info.
Encryption, check. Okay, now let's go back to employee cybersecurity training. We talked about how important it is, but what makes for a really effective training program?
Well, it should cover a wide range of topics, everything from password security and phishing awareness to malware prevention, social engineering, data protection, all of that.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is, and it needs to be tailored to the specific company and the industry they're in.
So it's not just a generic one-size-fits-all thing.
Definitely not. It has to be relevant and engaging, something that people will actually pay attention to and remember.
Right, because if it's boring, no one's going to learn anything.
Exactly. And there are all sorts of ways to do training now, too. You can have online courses, in-person workshops, even gamified learning experiences. The key is to make it interactive and keep people involved.
It sounds like there's no excuse for boring security training anymore. What about endpoint security solutions? We talked about antivirus and EDR, but are there other things businesses should be thinking about?
Oh, yeah, there are a ton of options out there. Each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, there's data loss prevention software, or DLP. That prevents sensitive data from leaving the network.
Oh, so it's like having a guard at the door, making sure no one walks off with confidential information.
That's a great way to put it. And then you have intrusion prevention systems, or IPSs. They actively block malicious traffic. Think of them like an extra layer of security on top of your firewall.
So again, it's about having multiple layers of protection, just like with network security in general.
Exactly. You want redundancy. You want multiple safeguards in place to catch anything that might slip through the cracks.
Okay, endpoint security? Check.
Mm-hmm.
Let's circle back to those security audits and penetration testing. You mentioned there are like health checkups for the network. Can you walk us through what that process actually looks like?
Sure. So a security audit is a really deep dive into your overall security posture. Experts come in and they look at everything: your policies, your procedures, your technical controls. They're looking for any weaknesses or vulnerabilities.
It sounds pretty comprehensive.
Oh, it is. They'll interview staff, review documentation, and conduct technical tests to really assess your defenses.
So they really leave no stone unturned. What about penetration testing? How's that different?
Penetration testing is more hands-on. Ethical hackers actually try to exploit vulnerabilities in your systems and applications. They use the same techniques that real attackers would. But it's all done in a safe, controlled environment, and with your permission, of course.
So it's like a simulated attack.
Exactly. The goal is to find those vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. And the results can be super valuable in helping you improve your security.
Right, better to find them now than the middle of a real attack.
Mm.
So both security audits and penetration testing are important for finding those weak spots. But how often should a business be doing these?
It really depends on a lot of factors, the size of the business, how complex their systems are, how much risk they're willing to tolerate. Even industry regulations can come into play. But a good rule of thumb is to do security audits at least once a year, and penetration testing every 2 years.
Okay, so regular checkups are key. Now, what about managed security services providers, those MSSPs we talked about earlier? What are the benefits of working with one of those?
MSSPs can be lifesavers, especially for businesses that don't have the internal know-how or resources to handle all their security needs on their own. They offer a whole bunch of services: 24/7 monitoring, threat detection, incident response and recovery, vulnerability management, even security awareness training and compliance support.
Sounds like they basically become an extension of your IT team.
Yeah, you could say that. They bring that deep security expertise to the table, which can be really valuable.
Especially for smaller businesses, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like having a dedicated security team on call without the overhead of hiring and managing a whole team yourself. But how do you go about choosing the right MSSP?
That's a good question. It's an important decision. And it starts with understanding your own needs and requirements. You need to find an MSSP that has the right experience, the expertise, and the resources to actually meet your needs. And don't forget about things like reputation, customer service, and of course, pricing.
Right. You don't just want the cheapest option, you want the best fit.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better for businesses to just build their own internal security teams instead of relying on an MSSP?
Well, for some larger organizations that have the budget and resources for it, sure, that might make sense. But for a lot of businesses, especially smaller ones, it can be incredibly expensive and complex to build and maintain a full in-house security team.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's all about weighing the costs and benefits. And working with an MSSP can offer a lot of advantages, especially for those organizations that need to focus their time and resources on their core business functions.
Right, I get it. Okay, MSSPs, check. It feels like we've covered so much in this deep dive. From defining those network vulnerabilities to exploring those scary cyber attacks to building a defense strategy. But before we move on to the final part of our conversation, what are the key things you really want our listeners to walk away with?
The number one thing to remember is that cybersecurity isn't a one-and-done kind of deal. It's a constant process. It takes vigilance, proactive measures, and being willing to adapt, because the threats are always changing.
So it's not just about setting it up and forgetting about it. You have to keep evaluating and improving your defenses.
Absolutely. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that you don't have to do this alone. There are so many resources out there, security professionals, industry organizations, even government agencies. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Great advice. Knowledge is power, and there's no shame in getting help from the experts. Now let's shift gears for a second. Thinking about your own personal digital life, what's one simple thing you can do today to improve your own security?
That's a good one. Even something as simple as turning on two-factor authentication for your email accounts, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do that. It's one of those things that I always think, oh, I'll do it later. But you're right, it's such a simple step.
It really is, and it only takes a few minutes to set up. A small investment of time for a big payoff and peace of mind.
Okay, two-factor authentication. It's on my to-do list for today. I think that's a great place to leave it for now. We've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive, but there's still more to explore. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the bigger trends in cybersecurity and what you need to know to stay ahead of the game. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this world of business network vulnerabilities, and honestly, it's been a real eye-opener for me, like a crash course in cybersecurity.
Yeah, we've definitely gone deep. And as we've seen, it's not just about the tech, it's about understanding the human side of things and how those threats are always changing.
Absolutely. One thing that stuck with me is this idea of, like, layering your defenses. It's not just about having one strong security measure. It's about creating a whole system, a multifaceted approach.
You got it. It's like building one of those medieval castles. You've got the outer walls, the moat, the drawbridge, the guard towers up top, all working together. Each layer adds to the overall strength of the fortress.
I love that analogy.
Mhm.
So, thinking about cybersecurity, what are some of those key layers that businesses should really focus on?
Well, we've already covered a bunch. Strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, data encryption, security awareness training for employees, endpoint protection, and those regular security audits and penetration testing. Each of these plays a critical role in preventing and mitigating those cyber attacks.
Right, so it's about having a plan, a strategy, not just reacting to things as they pop up.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that cybersecurity isn't just about the tech stuff. It's about people and processes, too.
Okay, I'm curious. What do you mean by people and processes in this context?
So on the people side, it's about creating a culture of security awareness throughout the whole organization. That means training employees to spot and respond to threats, but also setting clear security policies and procedures that everyone understands and follows.
So it's about making security everyone's job, not just the IT departments.
You got it. And then when we talk about processes, it's about having systems in place for things like how to respond to an incident, backing up and recovering data, and managing those vulnerabilities we talked about. These processes ensure that you're ready to handle security incidents quickly and efficiently to minimize any damage.
Okay, so like a well-trained army inside that castle, ready to defend it.
That's a great way to put it. And one thing I think is super important for businesses to grasp is the idea of risk management.
Okay, risk management. Why is that so crucial in cybersecurity?
Well, because you can never eliminate all risk. Cyber threats are always changing, and new vulnerabilities pop up all the time. The point of risk management is to identify, assess, and prioritize those risks, and then take steps to reduce them to a level you're comfortable with.
So it's about understanding that you can't prevent everything, but you can be smart about where you focus your efforts.
Exactly. It's finding that sweet spot between security and usability while also thinking about the potential costs and consequences if something does go wrong.
It's like a cost-benefit analysis, but with security as the top priority.
Yeah.
What are some practical things businesses can do to create a good risk management approach?
A great place to start is with a thorough risk assessment. That means figuring out what your critical assets are, the data, systems, and applications that are absolutely essential to your business, and then evaluating what threats and vulnerabilities could impact those assets.
It's like taking inventory, right? Figuring out what you have and what needs the most protection.
Precisely. And once you've identified those risks, you can start developing strategies to mitigate them. This could mean implementing new security controls, strengthening the ones you already have, or even accepting some risks if the cost of fixing them is too high compared to the potential impact.
So it's a strategic process, not just reacting to every scary headline you see.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that risk management isn't a one-time thing. You need to regularly review and update your risk assessments and your mitigation strategies as the threat landscape changes and your business grows.
Okay, so it's a continuous cycle of assessment, mitigation, and reevaluation. We've talked a lot about the technical stuff, but I'm curious about the human element. What are some mistakes businesses make that actually make them more vulnerable to attacks?
You know, there's that saying, the weakest link in any security system is the human element. And it's true, there are a lot of common mistakes that can really put businesses at risk.
Like what? Give me some examples.
One of the biggest ones is not having strong password policies. A lot of companies still allow weak passwords or passwords that are easy to guess, which makes them easy targets.
Right. And we all know how tempting it is to use the same password for multiple accounts, which is a huge no-no.
For sure. Another common mistake is neglecting security awareness training. A lot of companies assume their employees already know how to stay safe online, but that's not always the case. Regular training can help employees learn how to spot and avoid things like phishing scams, social engineering attacks, and other common threats.
It's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Investing in training can save you a lot of trouble later on.
Exactly. And another mistake I see a lot is companies not patching vulnerabilities quickly enough. We talked about this earlier, but software updates often include security patches that fix known weaknesses. But a lot of businesses drag their feet on patching, either because they're worried about compatibility issues or they just don't see it as a priority.
So it's procrastination, but with potentially huge consequences.
Exactly. And lastly, I think a lot of businesses just don't understand the importance of having an incident response plan. They think it'll never happen to us or we'll figure it out if it does. But having a clear plan in place can make a huge difference in minimizing the damage and recovering quickly.
It's like having a fire drill for your network. You might never need it, but if you do, you'll be glad you have it.
That's a great way to put it. Incident response planning means identifying potential threats, establishing procedures for containing and mitigating those threats, and making sure everyone involved knows how to communicate effectively.
All right, so we've covered a ton from the technical side of network security to the human element and how important risk management is. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. What's one emerging trend in cybersecurity that everyone should be paying attention to?
That's a great question. The world of cybersecurity never stands still, but one trend I think is really important is the rise of artificial intelligence, or AI.
AI. How is that impacting cybersecurity?
Well, AI is being used by both the attackers and the defenders. On the attacker side, AI can be used to create more sophisticated and targeted attacks. Think about phishing emails that are personalized for the recipient, or malware that's designed to get around traditional security measures.
So AI is basically making the bad guys even smarter.
It's a scary thought, but yeah, it's happening.
Mhm.
But on the defender side, AI can also be used to make our defenses stronger. AI-powered security tools can analyze huge amounts of data to identify and block threats in real time. They can even automate tasks like vulnerability scanning and patch management.
So it's a bit of an arms race then, AI versus AI.
You could say that, but I think the important thing to remember is that AI is a tool. It can be used for good or bad. It's up to us to make sure we're using it responsibly and ethically to make the digital world a safer place.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that technology can be used in a lot of ways, and we need to be aware of both the positive and negative impacts. Well, it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered a lot, but I hope our listeners have a better understanding of how complex network security is and why being proactive is so important.
Me too. It's been great sharing these insights, and I hope everyone keeps learning and stays informed about this ever-changing world.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and in the digital age, that's never been more true. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into business network vulnerabilities. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there in the digital world.